property, men and women of property, as they were once called when people like Wolfe Tone tried to organise the men and women without property. It was understood what that meant. It meant there were some people who had lots of wealth and property, and there was some who had little or none. And this is not a tax being imposed on those who have huge accumulations of wealth and property. This is a tax being imposed on every single ordinary citizen in this country, regardless of their ability to pay, and it is a tax simply on the roof over their head, which is effectively a tax on the right to live in a civilised way. That's what it is. It is an obnoxious attack on ordinary citizens in this country, utterly disregarding their capacity to pay it, to survive, to pay their bills, to educate their children, to manage in this extraordinarily difficult situation that so many find themselves in. And the Taoiseach, earlier on today in the Dáil, effectively admitted this. When he was asked the question, as he was by Deputy Higgins earlier on, how was it that 4 years ago he railed against any attempt to put a tax on the family home, and 4 years on was now imposing just such a tax? He said, well, things have changed, we're in an extraordinarily difficult situation, referring, of course, to the financial collapse caused by developers, bankers, speculators, bondholders, and all the rest of it. In other words, he was acknowledging precisely the point that we were making in referring to it as a bondholders' tax, that that's what it is. That there was no morality to it, there was no progressiveness to it. It was simply an austerity tax being imposed in order to satisfy the Troika and to ensure the protection of the bankers and the bondholders, and to make ordinary people pay for that fact. Clearly confirming what we have been saying and what everybody else in the country knows and believes to be the case, and why the government persists in the dishonesty of trying to pretend that it's progressive or that it's a property tax in any sense that ordinary people would understand, is just pure dishonesty and spin on their part. I would also like to draw the Minister another sort of indication or piece of evidence of how dishonest the attempt to call it a property tax is what is happening in the local authorities. And I presume what happened in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council this week is being replicated everywhere else. The county manager in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown was asked why in the budget that is going through the council this week there is no mention of the property tax. None whatsoever. Even though local authorities, in the case of Dún Laoghaire, will be required to pay €7 million to the central government to meet their obligations under this property tax, and it's not included in the budget. The county manager was asked, where will he get the money? If he has sent such a bill by the revenue commissioners, he said it will go on to the rents of council tenants. That's where he will get it. So people who have no property will have this imposed on them by the local authority, clearly indicating this is just a tax on ordinary people. It's not a property tax, and the bill is going to be paid by people who are local authority tenants. Similarly, the points have been made about people in negative equity, taxing the ball and chain that is around people's necks. I mean, it is like literally putting a ball and chain around somebody's neck, throwing them into the river, and then asking them why they can't swim, and threatening menaces and punishments for the fact that they can't swim. It's outrageous. And equally, for people who have their houses damaged by pyrite, or who have major structural problems like the people of Priory Hall, whose homes, mortgages and so on are a albatross around their neck, cannot in any meaningful sense be described as property, as a form of wealth on which it is legitimate to levy a tax. And the real giveaway, of course, which totally exposes the lies that are being used to justify this bill, is the fact that it has been collected by the revenue commissioners, the people who collect income tax, not by the local authorities. It won't increase in any way the provision of services, the funds available to local government. In fact, as I've just explained, local government will have to give money back to central government, having less money for services and punishing their tenants. It has been collected by the revenue commissioners, exposing the lie that, or the implication that there's somehow a different pot of money that ordinary people have. I mean, really, the minister, in trying to put this across, is guilty of the sort of mythology you tell young children when we talk about where are you going to get the money. Well, it's on the money tree in the back garden. I mean, does the minister think that hundreds of thousands of citizens who are unemployed, who've had their incomes savaged, who are in mortgage distress, that they have money trees growing out in the back garden, and that they're going to be able to go out and pick the money off the tree on their property in order to pay this tax? It's ludicrous. Yeah. It's absolutely ludicrous. So why don't you tell the truth? Why don't you tell the truth, at least in the title of this tax? Call it what it is. It's a tax to satisfy the greed of the bankers and the bondholders being imposed on the roofs over the heads of ordinary citizens of this country, regardless of whether they own that roof or not, and regardless of their inability to pay it, regardless of their ability, indeed, to keep food on the table for their children and their families. It's shameful.
Michael McGrath. Just to remind us, there are a good number of speakers. So.
Yeah, I understand. Last Ceann Comhairle, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to Section 1. Minister, sometimes I do despair about the way we conduct our business in this House. I don't believe that there is an organisation around the country that would make a decision of any importance in the way that we are making this decision. This is a historic bill. It is probably one of the most important bills that this Oireachtas will discuss and decide upon during this term. The bill with 159 sections, 88 amendments, and here we are with less than 3 hours left before the bill is going to be rammed through this House. Less than 3 hours. It is. Well,
Deputy Michael McGrath has the floor, please.
Well, Minister, you won't hear any bombast from me. I'll make a few points, and I want us to get down to the detail of the bill. But, Minister, I do want to remind you, as other deputies have done, that you don't have any mandate to introduce this bill and this property tax because you said you wouldn't do it. And in the general election last year, you and your party campaigned on the basis that you would not introduce any annual recurring tax on the family home. You said it would be unfair. You were looking at alternatives like increasing user charges for waste, and the central idea you had was a local site sale profits tax. That was your idea, and both of those you said would be fairer, more economically sensible than an annual recurring property tax. That's the basis on which you contested the election. That's the basis on which Fine Gael got the votes. The Labour Party did advocate a site value tax, but they said people in negative equity would need to have that taken into account, people who paid stamp duty, and they said certain categories of homeowners would need to be exempt. So there is no mandate whatsoever for the introduction of this property tax by this government. And fundamentally, Minister, at the heart of it, the flaw is you're not taking into account in any way the ability to pay. You're not taking into account the respective value of the mortgage attached to the property. And at the conclusion of second stage, you said this tax is structured to adhere to this government's other key objective to be fair and progressive. The wealthiest will pay the most. That's absolutely untrue. This isn't a tax on wealth. If it was, you would allow people to net off against the value of the property the respective value of the mortgage. That would be a start in having this debate. So let's not dress up this bill for something that it isn't. It isn't a tax on wealth. It takes no account of ability to pay. And as I said to the Taoiseach earlier on in this House today, a family, whether they have 2 kids, 4 kids or 6 kids, with a gross income per week of anything more than €480 per week, they will not be able to defer this tax in full. Sure, that is absolutely ridiculous. You're giving people who are in mortgage arrears the choice of paying a property tax or trying to service their mortgage in some way. This is in no way a fair tax, and I lament the way that we are dealing with this bill. I hope we can get down to some business, but if you had any sense, Minister, you would put this back to the new year. When the Taoiseach was challenged in the House today, why the rush? Why are we bulldozing this through the House now? He said, well, we're taking up the presidency of the EU on the 1st of January, and basically we need to get these things out of the way. Well, I can tell you, Minister, this bill and this property tax is far more important to most ordinary Irish people than Ireland taking up the presidency of the EU. There is no logical reason why we cannot return to this in January and debate it in a mature and a responsible way.
Deputy Brian Stanley.
To ask John Corley for the opportunity to contribute to this. My contribution will be short. I'm just looking here to my right, and it's interesting to note that the only member of the Labour Party present is a man that's involved in the campaign for Labour policy, because the rest of them have forgot what they actually campaigned on, and Minister Pat Rabbitte confirmed that for us the other night on television. The language, what's in Section 1 here is trying to get the language straight, the Second and Third Amendment, and I regret the fact that the First Amendment has not been taken from Sinn Féin as well. And language is everything. You know, serviceman and terrorist. The serviceman is the guy in the airplane with the big bomb. The terrorist is the fellow on the ground with the small bomb. That's the way it works. The cuts, we have cuts and we have the adjustments. You know, somebody tell me the difference. The language. We have property tax and the family home tax. So language is everything. Language is used to cover over everything. And the government here, Labour and Fine Gael, are deliberately using language, false language here, to mislead people into what's happening here. And I'm just going to make a short appeal. You're going to tax the disabled, you're going to tax the unemployed, you're going to put this on pensioners, on the low paid, the people who are behind closed doors this evening, hungry. I meet them. I've met some of them in the last week. People who bought houses, people who up to 3 or 4 years ago, Minister, were flying it. They didn't need any help from anyone. They didn't need any help from the state. They were net contributors to the state. They were pouring money into the coffers of the state in the form of VAT and PAYE and stamp duty and everything else. But now they're in dire straits, you know, and what's going to happen from this House is they're now going to be slapped with this penal tax of 300, 400 and 500 euros. So we should get the language straight. The point has been made in relation to council tenants. Council tenants don't have any wealth invested in the house. They pay a rent that you're going to put up, because that's what's going to happen here when this bill is passed back on to county managers. They are going to charge it on the local authority rent. And people in negative equity, you're actually taxing a liability. You're taxing people who are in negative equity, huge negative equity. Some of the properties, there's properties in the next estate to me that are worth 50,000. They were sold for 250,000. They're now being, you know, they were bought for 250,000 back during the boom. They are now making less than 60,000. That's what you're going to tax. Do you realise that? Can you look those people straight in the face and tell them what you're going to do? You're going to tax a liability. So we need to get the language straight here. And I'm saying this to you truthfully. You know, if you can put the economics and everything to one side, and we have presented the alternative based on your officials' figures, and surely you're not going to call those people on your right liars. You know, or nobody in here is. Is anybody going to call those people liars and say that the data that they gave to us in answer to parliamentary questions is false? It wasn't. They don't do that, and I have that much respect for them. What you're going to do is push families over the edge. There are families, there are people who I haven't seen for 12 months or 14 months that I've met in recent weeks. And I have seen the deterioration in their physical and mental health. These were strong people. Some of them had their own small businesses. They're now broken people, broken financially, broken physically, and broken mentally. And in the last week, I have had people sitting across the table from me, down in the constituency office, talking about suicide. One man said to me, I considered finishing the whole thing last Thursday. Now, normally, I would be referring people to the revenue. I would be referring people to the Department of Social Welfare. I would be referring people to MABS. I was referring this person to the Samaritans. And I want you to take this on board and to stop There's still time to pull back from this. You don't need to rush it through. The only reason you're rushing it through is so the deputies on the government benches can go back to their constituencies and eat their Christmas dinner in peace and not be harassed by constituents trying to change this. Because you know, if you leave this to January, what's going to happen. Constituents will turn the heat up, in particularly on the Labour Party, but also on the backbenchers in Fine Gael. So I'm asking you to have a bit of humanity. I'm asking you to change the language in this. I'm asking you to look at this again. And for God's sake, think of the people who were carrying this country and who built up this country and who are now on their knees and broken in the 3 ways that I've just described. And stop it once and for all.
Patrick Nulty.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Laska Herlock, and I'm very happy to contribute at the outset of this debate. Can I say at the outset, I do have to agree, I'm about 14 months in this House, and if a debate on an issue of this nature over a couple of hours is what passes for democracy in this country, then we have some very serious questions to answer. It is not real debate, and I don't think it's appropriate either to say, you know, that people contributing to the debate are engaging in bombast or anything like that. This is the only opportunity elected members of this House from all parties and all political philosophies get to actually discuss this issue, because it's being railroaded through, and that is wrong regardless of who the government is. And it should be said, it's totally undemocratic. Now, can I just say a couple of things in relation to the title of this bill? When people are talking about this so-called property tax, as it's called, people need to stop saying that it's progressive. It is not progressive. A tax that is progressive is based on paying it based on your income and ability to pay it. Someone on the average industrial wage will be facing the same liability for this tax as someone earning a six-figure sum. That is not progressive, that is regressive. And any economist or first-year student of political economy can tell you the difference between a progressive tax and a regressive tax. It's quite simple. I am disappointed that amendment number 1 here has been ruled out of order, because myself, my colleague Deputy Tommy Brune and MEP Nessa Childers have made similar proposals to you, Minister, in relation to looking at a wealth tax. I also understand that in section 17 of the bill, which we will come to later, my own amendment to increase the tax on homes worth over 1 million to 1% rather than 0.5% has been ruled out of order. Now that would be a very moderate increase, which you could bring in at perhaps later on this evening if you wanted to at the report stage or whatever the case may be. That would bring in an extra €24 million, I understand, which would pay for the restoration of the respite care grant that was forced through last week. Now, Minister, I understand that it was you and other Fine Gael ministers who stopped an increase in income tax for people earning €100,000 a year, because you're obsessed with protecting them, you're obsessed with looking after them, and it's protect the rich at all costs, but attack people on low incomes. Well, I spoke to someone last week who paid €10,000 in stamp duty. They're unemployed, they're facing losing the home, and where are they going to get the €250, €300 more to pay this? Where are they going to get it? You have to provide an explanation, because they're facing losing their home. Their asset is actually wrapped around their neck. They don't know how to get out of the suffocating personal debt they have, and the personal insolvency bill won't address it either. So we cannot simply go on getting blood from a stone, from sucking money out of the economy, which is costing jobs. The budget will cost 40,000 jobs, according to the Nevin Institute. That's not economic recovery. This bill is not progressive. It's another attack on working people. And unless there is a dramatic change in economic policy in this country, this economy will stagnate for years and years and years, with massive structural unemployment, which people will be picking up the pieces for years to come. Now, that's the reality. It's the reality that we face unless we change course. And this tax is the wrong tax on the wrong people. Although I do have to say, Fianna Fáil opposing it is absolute hypocrisy. Thank you very much.
Now call Deputy Shane Ross. We're on amendment number 1. Sorry, section 1. Section 1.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, listen to what the other deputies have to say, and when Deputy Higgins says that there will be resistance to this tax. He may represent a very different electorate from me, but, you know, he's right, wherever he's coming from. And I think the government has, in an extraordinary way, misread what the mood out there about this tax. The government has almost uniquely and unprecedentedly managed to unite Middle Ireland, people who are quite prosperous, people on middle incomes, and people on lower incomes. Because this tax, it's a kind of sledgehammer. It doesn't allow for anybody who's poor, bar people up to about 15,000. It doesn't allow for any exceptions in negative equity. It doesn't allow for any exceptions for mortgage arrears. It doesn't allow for any exceptions on stamp duty. And it expects Middle Ireland to accept it. And I think the minister should realise this is possibly a tipping point where he will see resistance which he didn't anticipate. There is nothing more guaranteed to garner and unite the opposition to the government than this particular tax. And the title of the bill, which we're debating now, summarises it, I think, perfectly. It's a lie, basically. This is not a property tax. This is not just a local tax. It's typical of those who draft bills of this sort that they now somehow produce syrupy words and show contempt for the electorate by expecting people to accept them as a description of what's inside this bill. And this is not what's in this bill. This bill is a tax on people who've got a roof over their heads, regardless of whether they're Middle Ireland or whether they're not. And you know, this misjudgment of the mood is something which I think the government will live to regret. And you know, the government knew perfectly well, and this is what's so distressing, the government knew perfectly well when they drafted this bill and called in the ranks of the revenue commissioners that they couldn't collect it in the way that they normally do. It's not a local property tax bill, because it's going to be levied by the people who are the most central to the collection of tax in this country, and also, not just the most efficient, but also the most feared. And you know, to ask the revenue commissioners is bringing in a dimension which says, we know we can't collect it any other way. Because, and I wasn't an advocate or a supporter of the household charge resistance campaign, and I'm not. But it was effective in one way. It showed that there is a tipping point for a large number of people whereby they will not pay their tax anymore or cannot. And in this case, it's worse. Because in this case, the government realized that there were people out there who cannot afford to pay it, so they introduced an absolutely tyrannical measure and said, well, these guys can't afford it. But someone in the department over there said, well, but it's a good bookkeeping exercise. We'll levy it anyway, and we'll take it out of their pay. And then, and I don't want to be overdramatic, but I think it's true, the people who have had it docked from their pay or from their social welfare will have to make hard choices. They'll have to decide whether they can eat properly, what they're going to feed their children, whether they're going to live in the cold, or what's going to happen. But the one thing that will happen will be they'll have to pay their property tax. This is unforgivable government. This is inhuman. This is saying we are desperate and the people are going to be more desperate. It is taking orders from elsewhere and making the people suffer unbearable punishment and penalties. And I can't understand why the government did not realize the pain that they're imposing on people on this. And I think everybody in their constituencies comes across this on a daily basis. And you know, it's quite extraordinary. The mention of property tax has that unifying effect, which is anti-government, anti-establishment, and has the potential to garner something, a rebellion on the taxation issue, which hasn't been seen here before. And you know, it is disgraceful what's happening here today. And I understand what the Minister said about bombast. Okay. But you know, Minister, it was your government that refused to give us time to discuss this at second stage. That's why you're getting second stage speeches now, because nobody got an opportunity to do it before. And that is further evidence of the contempt with which measures of this importance are treated by the government. Because you ram it through Parliament and then you say those who are taking advantage of the rules to get a debate going here, which wasn't evident at second stage, are somehow committing some sort of oratorical sins. It's the only opportunity you're giving us to do that, and certainly we're sacrificing the amendments, which, by the way, everybody in this House knows will be treated with contempt and will not be accepted. So we might as well take advantage of this period to say some of those things which we weren't able to say last week or when this came through. Because it is, as several speakers have said, it is not a tax on property exclusively. It's a tax, as Deputy Doherty said and others, it's a tax on debt. And I don't know, maybe the Minister will be able to, in his reply, give us another example. Do they tax overdrafts? Do they tax fixed loans? Is there anywhere else where they actually tax debt? It is so punitive and so thoughtless. It's just a sledgehammer taken and said there will be very few exceptions. And the idea of a deferral is further hypocrisy and cruelty. Because what you're doing here, when you allow people to defer, you're saying to those who defer, well, you can't afford it, and they can't, otherwise they wouldn't defer, and there are only people in dire straits who are going to be able to defer, but we'll give you another debt, and we'll charge you for it. We'll put you onto a spiral out of which you will no longer be able to come. And that is the thinking behind this bill. And I don't know which ministers or which members of government decided this, but its insensitivity smacks to me of some very, very insensitive mandarins who say there's a 500 million to be made there, let's do it, it makes good economic sense, it makes absolute human misery. And that is, I think, the thinking behind this bill. And it is fair to say, I think, that those in Dublin and those in Cork and those in urban city areas who have not been treated fairly, it would be only reasonable to have a debate at least on this.
Sorry, Deputy, we're on section 1.
I know, and I'm saying why it's the wrong title, and I'm going to elaborate on that. This is a local, section 1 is about whether it's a local property bill. And I'm addressing that issue now.
And commencement. Yeah.
Yes. The issue of whether people in Dublin or urban areas or in areas where the property is more valuable than an identical or similar property in a rural area or in other areas is a fair one to debate. And it's a fair one that should be thrashed out. And it seems very unfair that those who have got maybe smaller earnings, larger borrowings, but nominally more valuable houses should have to pay more in this tax than those who have large earnings, identical houses, and smaller borrowings. And that's the situation you have. And many people in my constituency of Dublin South and elsewhere will suffer because the minister, the government, and the Department of Finance are absolutely unprepared to make any reasonable concessions on this or indeed on stamp duty. And there are young people who've been hit by child benefit, hit by PRSI, hit by all the other things which have hit Middle Ireland, who are not able to pay this tax. One of the reasons being because they paid tens of thousands in stamp duty to the government already, which they regard as a property tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ross. Just to remind the House again, there are a lot of speakers. Deputy James Bannon, calling Deputy.
Very much, Ken Corla. I tried to get in last week in this bill, but unfortunately time didn't allow. So I was told I would.
Order, please.
I was told that I would get a chance to come in here at committee stage, and indeed Deputy McNulty is correct there when he spoke about the hypocrisy of Fianna Fáil, because we all know, and indeed you, Deputy McGrath, has a very, very short memory. And a blinkered memory. He's like
Deputy McGrath. Deputy, you can't display those. You can't display those posters. I want the same respect for. I want the same respect for Deputy Bannon as everybody else received.
He's like the bride in Cinderella. He's whiter than white. But I want to say this property tax has been pushed on us by the EU, IMF, and indeed in cooperation with Fianna Fáil after they bankrupt this country and sold us down the drain. And I mean, this is the party that talked about Republican, and it depends on the constituency you were in during the last election. I mean, in some constituency they had the Republican banner loud and clear and very visible on their election literature. In others, they had it tiny, you know, because people realised that people realised that you sold us down the drain. And indeed, I mean, the mismanagement.
Please, order, please. Section 1, Deputy Bannon, on Section 1. I've reminded other deputies.
The mismanagement of our economy was brought about by the actions of Fianna Fáil in the Galway tent and other places over the years, rather than doing the business at all in this House. And we had, I mean, the current leader of Fianna Fáil had its hands and indeed head in the government for the last 14 years. And you know, people don't forget that. And I mean, hopefully they will not forget that. I know before. I see the two twins, the terrible twins, are backing you up there. The rejects from Fianna Fáil, as bad as they were. But however, this property tax, and I have no doubt, is going to add to the burden and indeed hardships of many people throughout this country, and that's unfortunate. But I would plead with the Minister, and we know that a lot of people here in the country going through very rough times at the moment, and who have low incomes, etc., and cannot afford maybe the €100 all at the one time, and I would plead with him to include in this bill or legislation an easy payment system for the less well off, similar to what is applies in the collection of car tax. You know, there is an easy payment system there, and this is something that I would plead maybe he could include in this bill, where, you know, I think that's important.
Thanks.
Also, I have another fear that a penal property tax down the road could lead to the loss of our architectural heritage. And we all know back in the 40s and 50s, when rates was in being, a lot of fine period residents were unroofed at that particular time because people weren't able to meet the cost of high rates at the time. And I mean, our heritage is very important to us, and it's the cornerstone of our tourism industry. And I feel that there should be some provision there to protect heritage homes, and indeed our heritage is about what we inherit from the past, and I feel that there is a need to protect it, the built heritage in particular, which includes homes and that monuments and parks and gardens and historic sites, etc. And I mean, it provides links to the past, and I think it's important that we maintain those, and we maybe make some provision in the bill to protect heritage homes, and because there isn't, I know there is grants from the Heritage Council to refurbish some of those bills, but we don't want to see, we think that there should be some provision made, because the cost of maintaining a heritage home is excessive, you know. I mean, a lot of people would say to you, I prefer to throw an old house and rebuild rebuild the house rather than refurbish it. But I think there are important links with the past, and I think maybe the Minister will concede to some provision, or maybe in cooperation with the Minister for the Environment could look at this particular area. I think it's important. But anyway, we're all suffering because of the fraud, corruption, and indeed cover-up by some former politicians, by some senior executives, and indeed and some senior bankers in Ireland, and they're responsible for the illegal theft of taxpayers' money, and indeed the ruination of our country, and has left our economy in complete meltdown. And this is why we have to bring in a tough budget and indeed take tough decisions. But hopefully that there will be light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll rise like phoenix from the ashes as a better people and indeed a better society.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you for...
Come on. I now call Deputy Noel Grealish.
Good morning, Carla. I'll be brief because I'm aware there's a lot of amendments and a lot of speakers have touched a lot of the issues already. I think I just want to touch on a few items regarding this bill, Carla. Minister, I think that this is going to be one of the biggest issues of your government, the introduction of this property tax. There's families out there, Minister, I don't know if your colleagues come across this, but we're coming across this side of the house every single day of the week. They cannot put bread on the table, they cannot put clothes on their kids, and the worry they have at this Christmas, they can't even buy a Christmas present for their young kids. And now you're coming down and putting a property tax on them. This week alone, I had 2 parents into my office worrying about their kids, their sons and daughters that were married with 3 kids. These were middle-class, a middle-class couple, both working. And at the end of the month, with everything paid, all they had left in the region is 10 or 15 euro, and that is just to enjoy themselves. And now you're putting a property tax on top of them. And the big fear and worry is that you're bringing the revenue commissioners in to collect it. It's bad enough to put the charge on them, it's bad enough to put a tax on them, but now the fear. A lot of these citizens, Minister, are law-abiding citizens. They don't want to break the law. They want to be able to be in the position to pay their taxes. They want to be in the position to put their kids through school, to put the kids through college, to keep their loans paid. But a lot of them are not in that position at the moment. And Minister, I don't think you can cut your way out of a recession. The only way I think you can get out of recession is spend your way out of recession. You're taking money out of the economy. People are not spending. Businesses are closing. You're on about deducting this at source from their pay. What about the people, Minister, that are in rented houses, that the landlord is supposed to pay? So they're going to get away with this, are they? And if the landlord doesn't pay. I know of cases around the country, Minister, where landlords own 20, 30, 40 houses, haven't even paid the household charge. How are you going to get the money off them? The people living in these rented accommodations are going to be exempt, and the poor people that went and that now are being penalised for buying their house, paying their taxes on the houses within the border. Now you're going to put another charge on top of them. And as a lot of the other speakers said here, why is this bill to be guillotined tonight? I sat on the other side of the house many a time, and I seen you roaring and dancing when guillotines are brought in. And you even said on this side of the house that you're in government, you'd never do that. But one of the most important bills that's going to affect every single person in this country, because we all have to live in houses, is going to be guillotined at 11 o'clock tonight. Minister, if one thing you can do not bring in the guillotine tonight. Give everybody an opportunity, give everybody a chance to debate this. We're on about this. We're going to see improved services in our local authorities. We are not. I know one local authority said if they get extra money, they're going to use this to pay off the loans that they have. So the money is going to end up going back to the banks. Then you have the Minister for Transport, Leo Varadkar, saying that he wants, if you want your estate road tarred or side road tarred, that the locals will have to pay in towards that as well. He's putting a 10 million fund. That's another tax, Minister.
We're definitely moving away from section
Okay, Minister, I have other issues there that I'm going to raise hopefully during the course of the bill. But Minister, I ask, do not guillotine this bill tonight and listen to the people on this side of the house.
Come on, Deputy Stephen Dundee.
Thanks, Last King Corla.
On section 1.
Minister, the name of the bill is somewhat misleading. In schools of policy, they say that a good policy has to meet 3 criteria. It's got to be technically correct, which is usually the job of the officials. It's got to be politically acceptable, which is usually the job of the politicians, and it's got to be implementable. Minister, this local property tax, or so-called local property tax, seems to fail all 3 of those. It's clearly not politically acceptable. You're going to ram it through, you're going to whip your TDs in, but it's not politically acceptable to the public. It's going to be difficult to implement because the revenue commissioners don't have the kind of data they need, and they may not have the resources they need. And this is, I guess, where I'm most surprised at you, Minister, is it is technically clearly flawed. And I'm curious as to where the thinking on this comes from. It can come from one of only 4 places. It comes from either you, Brendan Howlin, the officials in finance, or the officials in public expenditure and reform. They're the only 4 places it can come from. Well, the Thornhill report says 0.1%. You've gone on twice that. The Thornhill, Minister, if you were going to, we can talk later about the Thornhill report. But that's what confuses me, is that you would, they said a lot of things that you're not doing, Minister, is that you would do this. Now, I've paid local property tax. I paid it in London, I've paid it abroad. And I didn't mind paying it because I lived in the house. I was able to pay the tax, and it provided me with local services, and I got a letter from the council saying this is what you've paid and this is what you're getting for this. But this doesn't meet any of those things. It is grossly unfair, and I have to say I'm absolutely bemused as to why you're going ahead with this. It's not for local services. If it was, people in Wicklow and South Dublin wouldn't pay more than anybody else when the services are less expensive to produce. So we know it's not for local services. It is astounding to me that you're not looking at the net value of the house. It is genuinely astounding. As someone from that generation who knows an awful lot of people in negative equity, including myself, it astounds me that any government would turn around and say, you made a big mistake, you were one of the parties involved in that mistake, it has financially wiped you out. Your generation, the people who did that, you folks are going to get back to 0 at about 55 years of age. For the rest of your lives, this one thing, this one mistake you made, is going to financially destroy you. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to tax you on that. Minister, I've got a student loan. Sure, why tax me on that? You know, there's lots of people in here, I'm sure, have overdrafts. Sure, tax us on that. It's absolutely extraordinary. And again, you're not bringing in ability to pay. How are you not bringing in ability to pay? Like, what are you going to do? As Deputy Ross and others have said, what are you going to say to the people who don't have money to feed their kids? What are you going to say to the people that are walking into our offices, and I'm sure yours, saying, I'm having suicidal thoughts, or my children are hungry? You know, but I live in a house that the market value might be 250, but I bought it for 500. I've lost my job. My partner's lost their job. We have nothing. But, you know, here's another 500 euros. What are you going to say to those people? It's just absolutely extraordinary. Now, Minister, I have a genuine question for you. I do notice I've gone through all of the amendments, that you haven't tabled a single amendment. So I ask you, are you intent, because we're not going to get through all of these amendments. There are very well-meaning, technically sound amendments from many deputies in here, and we're obviously not going to get through them. You may describe all of this as bombast, Minister, but this is the only chance we get to try and represent the people. So my question is, are you intending on taking any of these, or are we just going to go back and forth for the remaining 2 and a bit hours, and you're going to get all your deputies to vote for these? So I would like to know if you do intend taking any of these. And a final word to the government TDs, none of whom are present in the chamber. But if any of them happen to be listening on their monitors in their offices, what I'd say to them is this. There was an awful lot of strong rhetoric used in the chamber in the small amount of time given in second stage to change this bill. Now, you haven't tabled a single amendment, not one, very unusually. The Finance Committee, Deputy Doherty, Deputy McGrath, Deputy Boyd Barrett, Deputy Higgins, myself and others, we're not going to get a chance to look at this. The Local Government Committee, they're not going to get a chance to look at this. So here's what I'd say to any government TDs who may be listening to this. Your minister hasn't tabled a single amendment, which means that you have had absolutely zero influence, which means that your entire argument of it's better to have, you know, be in the party because you can influence legislation on one of the most important pieces of legislation that's going to come before this Dáil in this government's lifetime, you have been able to change not a single letter. And therefore, if people like Deputy Mitchell, who said that this would cause revolution in the country, if people like Deputy Mitchell believe what they said, then as public representatives, they should vote against it. So I guess we'll go on. I would be interested to know, Minister, if you're intending on accepting a single amendment, and we could, you know, we could do away with this sort of parliamentary charade that we seem to be engaged in.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call Deputy Joan Collins.
Thanks, last Corla. I won't take up too much time at all because I think many of the points have been made. But I just want to put onto the minutes of the debate that this is probably the most inappropriate and untrue heading that has come before me in the Dáil anyway over the last year and a half. This is the most draconian, feudal piece of legislation that this country has ever seen in decades, absolute decades, where the Revenue Commission is being brought in as a strong arm of the law to force people to pay who cannot pay. If you cannot pay by the end of the year, the Revenue will have the authority to go into your income tax, your wages, and take tax credits off those people. And then those people have to decide, well, that's going to be taken out of my pay packet. Do I put food on the table? Do I pay my ESB bill? Do I pay my gas bill? How do I get into work, etc. So it's one of the most draconian pieces of legislation. And Minister, I'm saying to you that this will be the most hated tax in this country, brought in by Fine Gael and Labour government. It'd be much worse than your tax on shoes that was brought in decades ago. The household tax resistance and boycott was actually progressive from the point of view that it actually united rural and urban communities. And that's the basis of people wanting to resist this property tax. And it shouldn't be, and it will not be viewed by other deputies saying about in more lucrative areas of their constituencies, and that this is more of a tax on them, etc. This is a family home tax. It's a tax to bail out the bondholders and etc. It cannot be said in any other formation. This country is probably one of the most highest home ownership in Europe, actually, because we were always, the housing policy in this country has failed the people over the last decades, where people were encouraged to go out and buy homes, mortgage interest relief, everything else put in place to try and encourage people to buy them. And now, just when we most need protection, you come after people for a family home tax. When I close my door, it's not a door on a property, it's a door of my family home. When I'm going home, I don't say I'm going home to a property, I'm going home to my home to close my door, to light a fire, look after the family. Minister, this is going to be a failed policy, and even if you ram it through, and even if you get people and you take the tax out of their wages in 2014, this will be resisted, and people will be just waiting for you to come knocking on the doors, because I'm telling you, their doors will be slammed in your face.
I now call Deputy Matty McGrath on Section 1.
As Cahill, indeed, I'd like to speak on Section 1 as well. The debate here tonight. I'm delighted to be able to come in. I'm extremely disappointed, Minister, that you're guillotining this, because, like other speakers have said, the last 4 years I was over on that side of the House, you were constantly objecting to the guillotine. And you made a big play that when you're in government, you'd have to, we all understand the guillotine has to be used occasionally. But this is outrageous, Minister. All last week and this week and up to 11 o'clock tonight and guillotine this. And you had the charade of sitting yesterday for 4 hours. Your Minister of State came in here last Friday week and summarily cancelled the Monday sitting. And then he tried to protrate it because of lack of interest this side of the House. Gross misrepresentation, Minister. Grossly unfair. And I hate calling it the word LIE, but it's misleading in the extreme, and it's that shameful. And Minister, if I was you tonight, I'd be extremely worried. You're a long-serving deputy in this House, not longer than I am. But you haven't a sinner. Not one solitary member of the House. Well, Deputy Bannon is left. He seems to be more interested in the landed gentry, the house, the big houses. Someone that we burned in the troubled times to get rid of the black and tans. And they still have no roofs on them. He wants to put the roofs back on them instead of, and take the clothes off the ordinary people. I can't understand where he's coming from, but he'll find out too when he goes back to Longford. And when he goes up all the tree-lined avenues and he'll meet the fellas coming down against him. I tell you what, Minister, this is not fun. I'm saying to you, Minister, how can you introduce this? And it does give the lie, as Deputy Donnelly said, to the deputies that say they're voting for this because they can influence government from within. I can tell you, the late Brian Linehan and Deputy McGrath, my namesake, will confirm this. He never sat here in these tough times without a few of us behind him in support of him. And when he was accessible and amenable to us and to amendments as well from our own group. But I don't know what's going on with you. I think the majority is the biggest problem. You think you can do what you like. To hell with the ordinary people. And touch the Cromwell back again, to hell with the Connacht. As I said last week, to hell with the ordinary people. Let them go to the soup houses or to the homeless refugees. And that's what you're going to do to people, Minister. We're talking about people here, Minister, honest to goodness people who are going to get a deferral. A deferral, if you wouldn't mind. I'm dealing with revenue a long time, Minister. With 30 years, going to 31 years now. And I never got a deferral from yet. Never. And if you get the deferral, you have the luxury of getting a 4% increase on top of the money you owe. That's a nice deferral, Minister. I wouldn't like to be dealing with all my customers like that. Or I would like to be dealing with them if that's the kind of way I was treating him. And then if you can't pay, if you're just simply unable to pay, you're going to get the pleasure of an 8% penalty on top of it. What world are you living in? Oh, Benner has arrived, Deputy Doctor has arrived. I'm glad that someone came to support you, Minister. And he's here a long time too. And I won't take that from any of you. We all have the same mandate here, in spite of what Deputy Bannon seems to think, that I'm a reject from someplace else. I tell him I'm a reject from nowhere. And I never will be. And he might be very soon if he carries on this way. I tell you, Minister, the whole lot of us here will be rejected if you try and impose this tax on people who cannot pay. Take the rural people who wanted to build a house for themselves. They went out and they bought a site. They hired planners and architects. They went and got their paid planning fees. They paid development charges and stamp duty legal fees. And they're trying to pay back the mortgage the best they can. Many of them in huge negative equity. And you can come along and put a property tax. A local tax, if you wouldn't mind. Local. And we know what's going to happen, that it won't be spent locally. And if it will, it'll go to the county managers first. And the director of services and all the senior officials will be paid anyway, before any other service or potholes will be filled or any services will be given in rural Ireland. And I say to you, Minister, too, and to your officials who have no respect for anything personally, but this is someone in your department, some of the men that are there that are isolated and insulated. Drew up this 500 million here, soft money, we'll easily get this in. And we won't make the mess like we did last year with Minister Big Phil to Minister Hogan, the regressor. No, we won't handle it, we won't make it back to it like last year, excuse the expression. We'll give it to the revenue, who haven't an awful lot to do now because so many business people are out of business. And a lot of them are in revenue commissioners now have nothing to do because they have so few people to take money off of. Because they're all closed down, Minister, because of policies of the last government and this government and several governments, and the policies of the permanent government, who don't understand what it is to have to end the day's pay, or to pay rates, or to pay taxes, or to pay anything else. Because they're cushioned. And I never saw that more than I did when the Minister Linehan got arrested and brought in the pension levy. Went back of it for a small cohort of people. And where was the cohort? The ones who were in his office every day of the week and had access to him. And persuaded them to go back of it. Get the man on the shovel, or the clerical office had to pay it. And I think that's was one of the slippery slopes we went down. And they're continuing.
McGrath, you're moving away.
I'm well away from it, I know it, but the guillotine is on it, so all bets are off as far as I'm concerned.
No,
and the biggest bet,
no.
And the biggest bet on this one, last count call is, I want to leave time for my colleague.
And yes,
I'm nearly finished. I'm nearly finished. No May the one. I'm out at the hull. I just say to you, Minister, I'm glad now that one or two more have arrived. And I think the public are watching this, Minister. And as I said, I've no disrespect for you, but how are you going to get blood out of a stone? They haven't got it. I've never got it. I've customers who couldn't pay me. I never got it, Minister. I had to just do without it. You cannot get it. And to give it to the revenue. And I've dealt with revenue. And a lot of good people in revenue. I had a reasonable relationship over the years. But if I couldn't pay, who got it? The sheriff was the man that got it. And I could deal with the revenue. I couldn't deal with the sheriff. And this is what we're going to have now. The sheriff and Gardaí, are we breaking down doors with the Trojans? Minister, that's what you're going to force on these people, and that's what staring us in the face, in the name of the Troika, and you had no choices, but you had dozens of choices, Minister. You had the choices of going out, the Winters asked you to tax the drink that's been sold in supermarkets at below cost, and a billion could be brought in there, Minister. You also had the choice of taxing the very well off, and means testing children's allowance, Minister. The Department of Social Protection pretended they can't do it. My 6th class student with a computer and our friend could do it. And we have a lethargic, inept civil service that tells us we can't do it. But that game is over. You've been found out, Minister, and the officials. And don't bring this in, Minister. Don't get it in tonight, because you know, and I know what's going to happen. The people can't pay, and we're a proud people in this country, like to pay our way and have paid our way. But we're not going to go back to the land of the Peapo Day boys and the landlords and the burden detached in the houses. They won't have roofs in the houses, according to Deputy Bannon. He wants to rebuild all the listed houses. The one like James Riley have below money God.
Minister.
We'll exempt them, maybe, Minister. But we'll kill the little people. I ask you, Minister, look into your conscience. I know you have one, but I know some of your colleagues, and say, is this honest, right, fair, or proper? Please, Minister, and look, withdraw the guillotine and have some semblance of respect and understanding of the ordinary people of Ireland. Go Margaret.
I now call Deputy Michael Healy-Ray on.
Yeah, thank you very much, last count caller. Minister, first of all, we all know that you're a politician of great experience, great ability, and somebody who is highly regarded in the houses of the Oireachtas. And I wouldn't say that, only that I mean it. But equally, your experience will let you to know that the people that we are speaking about on this side of the house this evening, we're talking about young couples, people who really cannot, they're put to the pin of their collar to try and pay their mortgages. Last Saturday, at my clinics, like my colleagues around here, I have their names in my book. I had people that came into me that have left their houses because they cannot afford to live in the houses that they're paying a massive mortgage on. And what they were asking me about was this week, and why were we going to allow the government to bring in a property tax on property that they cannot afford to live in. I had a husband and his wife and their little child telling me how they had moved back into her parents' house because they couldn't afford the oil or the electricity or the cost of living in their home after they're building it at the height of the boom. And now they're being told they have to pay a property tax on it. I'm very grateful to Deputy Stephen Donnelly for outlining a great lie in this house. And that is people who blindly come in here supporting the government and giving the impression, oh well, we're better off working within the government because we can do things from within the government. Well, I have a message for those people tonight, and I hope they're watching their monitors. The people that I'm thinking of, they haven't delivered a wheelbarrow of tar to their constituencies. They couldn't deliver a lottery grant to their constituencies. There is places, Minister, and you're smiling because you know where I'm talking about. There is places, Minister, and this is no laughing matter, where people went to government supporting TDs for a lottery grant. They'd have as good a chance of going to Santa Claus because those backbenchers, they'll never deliver anything as long as if they lived forever on that side of the house, they'll deliver nothing.
We get back to the bill.
I'm on the bill. I'm on the bill, last count caller. Well, I'm here to speak up for those people, and I want to lay the lie about the better government services. We had, as has been stated here, Minister Leo Varadkar, but inexperience will show now and then, he let the cat out of the bag when he said, well, the people, if they'll want their roads tarred, they'll have to make a contribution themselves. That was a new one. And if he had your experience, he wouldn't have come out with that last week. He'd have waited till after Christmas. But he'll learn. If you're going to come along with this story, that we're claiming the property tax to get in money to do work for people, but at the same time now we're telling them that they have to pay on the double, people won't stand for it, Minister, because people don't simply have the money. And it was a horrible experience a while ago to listen to a person trying to defend the indefensible and talking about old houses and protect the old houses. I have as much respect for old houses as anybody, but the houses that I'm interested in are the houses where there's young families inside them tonight, and where there's young children looking forward to Santa Claus, and we all know that Santa Claus will come to them, but it won't be any thanks to this government. And what I have to say is, those people, those genuine young couples who had a better time during the boom when their expectations were that the work would continue for them, but now the work is gone, they're left with a massive mortgage, and now the government is supporting TDs, and don't think they'll be able to hide behind this massive majority that you have, because the people, thanks be to God, are extremely intelligent. They can see what the government are doing to them. There was all types of promises made. Fianna Fáil were the worst crowd in the world. They did everything wrong, and everything was done against the people. But now they're able to see that the people that were shouting and crowing from this side, give us the chance and we'll do everything right. You have power now, and I'm sick to death of every day hearing people on that side of the House. You'd swear to God that Fianna Fáil were still in power, because they're still blaming Fianna Fáil. They're still blaming Fianna Fáil. What they've forgotten is that there has been a little matter of an election. You now have the biggest majority in the history of the state, and what are you doing with it?
Sorry, Deputy.
You're cutting